The dust swirled around Ilara's worn boots, a gritty testament to the town's parched soul. Judge Thorne's voice, amplified by self-righteousness, cut through the tense silence of the assembled crowd. "She refuses," he declared, his jowls quivering. "Refuses the honorable match, refuses the sanctity of order." His gaze, cold and assessing, raked over Ilara, lingering on the soft curves of her form, a form deemed too generous, too much, by the rigid standards of Redemption Creek. Ilara stood straight, a small tremor in her hands the only outward sign of the terror coiling in her belly. She had said no. A simple word, yet it had ignited a fury she hadn't anticipated. The man chosen for her, a crony of the judge, twice her age with eyes like a starved coyote, had smirked, his confidence unshaken until her refusal echoed. Now, the town watched, a collective entity of pinched faces and whispered condemnations. An affront, Thorne continued, his voice rising, to decency, to this community. He gestured towards the jagged cliff edge that bordered the town square, a stark drop to the unforgiving rocks below. Such defiance must be met with consequence. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Ilara's resolve. Her breath hitched. The wind, a mournful character in this unfolding drama, whipped her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. She saw no kindness in the faces around her, only a grim satisfaction, a hunger for spectacle. Two of Thorne's men, burly and impassive, stepped towards her. She didn't struggle. What was the use? Her protest was a single, fragile reed against a storm. They grabbed her arms, their fingers biting into her flesh. She felt the rough scrape of the cliff's edge against her worn dress as they dragged her. A gasp, quickly stifled, escaped her lips. Then, the sickening lurch of emptiness as she was thrust over the precipice. The sky wheeled. The wind roared in her ears. A single, sharp cry was torn from her throat before impact stole her breath, consciousness fracturing into 1,000 painful shards. Below, unseen by the departing townsfolk who cast no backward glances, a figure moved. Silas had watched from the shadow of the dilapidated livery, his face a mask of stone. He hadn't interfered. He never interfered. That was the town's business. But the raw brutality, the casual discarding of a life, resonated with a deep, old ache within him. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his long legs covering the treacherous descent to the base of the cliff with an unsettling ease. He found her crumpled amongst the scree, a broken doll. Her breathing was shallow, a faint flutter against the vast indifference of the landscape. He expected death. He found a flicker. He knelt. His large, calloused hands were surprisingly gentle as he checked for a pulse, as he examined the unnatural angle of her leg, the blood matting her dark hair. He didn't speak. There were no words for this. There were rarely words for anything in Silas's world. He gathered her into his arms, her weight a fragile burden. The town, sated, had retreated to its shuttered homes, its simmering judgments. He carried her away from it, towards the isolation of his ranch, a place where the wind spoke more sense than most men. The journey was long, the sun beating down, then giving way to the chill of dusk. Ilara drifted in and out of a painful haze, aware only of a steady strength beneath her, a rhythmic movement, a pervasive silence that was, strangely, not threatening. He laid her on the simple cot in his cabin, the only soft place in the sparsely furnished room. He cleaned her wounds with water from the basin, his touch impersonal yet thorough. He set her broken leg with practiced hands, binding it with strips of clean cloth. He built a small fire in the hearth, the flames pushing back the encroaching cold, a small beacon against the vast darkness. He didn't speak. He simply acted. And Ilara, suspended between agony and oblivion, felt a pinprick of something other than terror, a stark, bewildering neutrality. Ilara woke to the smell of wood smoke and a dull, throbbing pain that encompassed her entire being. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. The rough-hewn ceiling, the stone hearth, the single window showing a sliver of grey dawn, it was all alien. Then memory, sharp and cruel, returned to the judge's face, the hateful eyes of the crowd, the fall. A choked sob escaped her. Her body screamed in protest as she tried to sit up, her leg a fiery agony. A shadow moved in the dim light. Silas. He was sitting on a low stool by the fire, his back to her, mending a piece of tack. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge her cry, yet she felt his awareness of her, a silent, watchful presence. Fear, a familiar companion, tightened its grip. Was he another tormentor? Another captor? But his stillness was different from the predatory stillness of the men in town. It was the stillness of the mountains, of ancient trees. He rose, his movements economical, and ladled water from a bucket into a tin cup. He approached the cot, his boots silent on the packed earth floor. He offered her the cup. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, met hers briefly, unreadable. She hesitated, her throat raw. Her gaze flickered to his hands, large, scarred, capable. The hands that had, presumably, brought her here. She took the cup, her fingers brushing his. His skin was rough, warm. The water was cool, a balm to her parched throat. He retreated to his stool, resuming his mending. The silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant sigh of the wind. He didn't speak. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand gratitude. He simply was. Hours passed. He brought her a bowl of thin broth, its warmth seeping into her chilled bones. He changed the dressing on her head wound, his touch still impersonal, yet careful. He added wood to the fire. Elara watched him, her fear slowly giving way to a weary curiosity. Who was this man who lived in such profound silence, who had plucked her from the edge of death and offered her succor without a single word? Shame, a heavy cloak, settled over her. The judge's pronouncements echoed in her mind, too fat, defiant. She felt grotesque, unworthy of even this strange, silent kindness. She pulled the thin blanket higher, trying to disappear. Later, when the sun was higher, casting pale light into the cabin, she saw him take her dress, the one she had been wearing, torn and stained from the fall, and begin to meticulously mend the rents. He sat by the window, the needle moving with a surprising deftness in his large fingers. He smoothed the fabric, his brow furrowed in concentration. It was a simple garment, coarse and ill-fitting, but he treated it with a strange reverence. He didn't look at her. He just mended. She watched his hands. Strong hands. Hands that could break, but also hands that could fix. The gesture, so unexpected, so tender in its practicality, chipped away another sliver of her fear. He wasn't like them. He wasn't like anyone she had ever known. As evening fell, he placed the mended dress, neatly folded, at the foot of her cot. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The repaired cloth spoke volumes, a silent promise of care in a world that had only offered cruelty. Elara touched the mended seam, her fingers tracing the neat stitches. A single tear escaped and traced a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sorrow, or even pain. It was something else, something fragile and new, something she couldn't yet name. Days bled into weeks. Elara's body slowly began to heal, the sharp edges of pain dulling to a persistent ache. Silas continued his silent ministrations. He brought her food, rabbit stew, dried jerky, coarse bread. He kept the fire stoked. He changed her bandages. He never spoke, not a single word. And Elara, in turn, remained silent, her voice locked away with her trauma. She learned the rhythm of his days, the early rise, the tending of his few animals or a horse, a couple of goats, the mending of fences, the chopping of wood. He moved with a purpose that seemed to emanate from the very land he inhabited. It was a harsh land, unforgiving, yet he seemed a part of it, as weathered and resilient as the ancient junipers that dotted the landscape. She would watch him from the cot, then later, as she grew stronger, from the cabin doorway, propped up with a crude crutch he had fashioned for her. She saw the solitude that clung to him, a cloak as palpable as the dust on his hat. Once, she saw him pause by two small, weathered wooden markers on a slight rise behind the cabin. He stood there for a long time, his back to her, his head bowed. He didn't weep, not in any way she could see, but the air around him grew heavy with a sorrow so profound it seemed to seep into the soil. She understood then, or began to, the source of his silence, the wellspring of his deep-seated quiet. He carried a loss that had no words. The town, Redemption Creek, felt miles away, a bad dream. But its shadow lingered. One afternoon, a rider approached the ranch. Not Silas. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat. It was Deputy Miller, a man whose chin receded almost as much as his capacity for independent thought. He rode with an air of self-importance, his gaze sweeping the small homestead with suspicion. Silas met him at the edge of the yard, his stance relaxed but unyielding. Miller puffed out his chest. "Silas. Heard tell you've got company." His eyes darted towards the cabin, where Ilara quickly shrank back from the doorway. Silas didn't speak. He simply looked at the deputy, his expression unchanging. Miller shifted uncomfortably. "Judge Thorne's asking questions. About that woman. The one who fell." He stumbled over the word, the lie tasting foul even on his tongue. "Folks are saying you took her." Silas remained silent. His stillness was a wall. "Now, Silas," Miller blustered, "the judge just wants to ensure her welfare. If she's here, she needs to come back. For her own good." The wind picked up, whistling through the eaves of the cabin, a mournful counterpoint to Miller's uneasy assertions. Silas took a slow step forward. He didn't raise his voice, because he had none to raise in that moment, but his presence seemed to expand, to fill the space between them. Miller instinctively took a step back, his horse sidling nervously. "Just doing my job, Silas," he mumbled, his bravado deflating. Silas tilted his head, a minimal gesture, but it conveyed an absolute finality. Miller, unnerved by the unwavering silence, the sheer intractability of the man before him, decided further inquiry was unwise. He tugged on his reins. Tell her the judge is concerned," he managed, then turned his horse and rode away, casting nervous glances over his shoulder. Ilara watched him go, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The town had found her. The fragile peace she had begun to feel shattered. Silas turned back towards the cabin. He looked at her, his gaze holding hers for a longer moment than usual. He didn't speak. But in his eyes, she saw not judgment, not accusation, but a quiet, resolute defiance. He had shielded her, wordlessly. That evening, as he prepared their meager meal, Ilara found a small, intricately carved wooden bird placed on the windowsill beside her cot. Its wings were outstretched, as if in mid-flight. She picked it up, her fingers tracing the smooth, polished wood. It was a thing of simple beauty, a silent offering. He didn't speak. She didn't speak. But the bird sang a song of fragile hope in the quiet room. The seasons began to turn, the harsh summer sun giving way to the crisp bite of autumn. Ilara's leg healed, leaving her with a slight limp, a permanent reminder of Redemption Creek's cruelty. But with physical healing came a different kind of strength. She started to move beyond the confines of the cabin, tentatively at first, then with more confidence. She began to help Silas, small tasks initially. She collected eggs from the irritable hen, her movement slow and careful. She weeded the small, hardy patch of vegetables he cultivated near the creek. He didn't ask her to, she simply started doing it, and he didn't stop her. Their communication remained almost entirely nonverbal. A nod from him indicated approval or direction. A shared glance across the yard could convey understanding. He showed her how to properly bank the fire at night, how to split kindling with a small axe, his hands guiding hers briefly, his touch calloused but patient. She learned to read the subtle shifts in his posture, the slight tightening of his jaw that signaled displeasure or concern, the rare softening around his eyes that might pass for contentment. She discovered the graves were for a woman named Martha and a child, Lily. The names were crudely carved into the wooden markers. She never asked. He never explained. But the knowledge settled within her, a quiet understanding of the immense grief that had hollowed him out and then, paradoxically, filled him with a resilient strength. The silence of the ranch, once alien and unnerving, became a comfort. It was a silence filled not with unspoken resentments, but with the sounds of the land, the wind through the pines, the cry of a hawk, the distant lowing of Silas's horse. It was a silence that allowed her to hear her own thoughts, to begin to sort through the wreckage of her past. The shame was still there, a persistent shadow, but it no longer consumed her. In Silas's unwavering, non-judgmental presence, she began to feel less like a monstrous aberration and more like a person who had simply endured too much. The town, however, did not forget. Whispers grew louder, uglier. Judge Thorne, his authority challenged by Ilara's disappearance and Silas's silent defiance, fanned the flames of outrage. He painted Silas as a reclusive deviant, a kidnapper holding an unwilling woman captive. He painted Ilara as a fallen woman, a Jezebel who had lured Silas into sin, or perhaps a witless creature needing rescue from his clutches. The narrative shifted to suit Thorne's agenda, but the underlying malice remained constant. One day, Ilara found Silas staring at the horizon, his silhouette stark against the setting sun. There was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before. He knew, as she did, that the fragile piece they had carved out was threatened. He turned, his gaze meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something akin to worry in his eyes. He didn't speak. But she understood. The outside world was closing in. That night, she didn't just mend her own clothes. She found one of Silas's worn shirts, a tear along the seam, and carefully, by the light of the fire, she stitched it closed. It was a small gesture, her own silent message. When he found it the next morning, laid neatly on his stool, he paused. He picked it up, ran his thumb over her stitches. He looked at her, a long, searching look. Then, he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. A silent acknowledgement. A silent thanks. In that moment, Ilara felt a profound shift within her. The fear was still present, a cold knot in her stomach, but alongside it, a new feeling was taking root, a fierce, protective loyalty. She would not be a victim again. She would not let them destroy this quiet man who had shown her nothing but kindness. Her voice, long dormant, felt like a stone in her throat, but the first cracks were beginning to appear in its silence. The confrontation came on a cold, blustery morning. The sky was the color of lead, mirroring the mood of the approaching riders. Judge Thorne led the grim procession, his face a mask of sanctimonious fury. Behind him rode a dozen men from Redemption Creek, their expressions ranging from reluctant duty to outright eagerness for a reckoning. They carried tools that could double as weapons, pitchforks, axes, a few old hunting rifles. Silas stood before his cabin, a solitary figure against the vast, indifferent landscape. He wore the mended shirt. He was unarmed, his hands loose at his sides, but his stance was that of a mountain, immovable. Ilara watched from the cabin doorway, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. This was it. The culmination of months of fear and fragile hope. Thorne reined in his horse, his voice booming across the yard, laced with manufactured outrage. Silas! We've come for the woman. Release Ilara Miller to the rightful authority of this town. Ilara! He still used her father's name, a name she had shed along with her old life. Silas didn't speak. He just watched them, his gaze steady, unblinking. Don't be a fool, man. Thorne spat. You're harboring a runaway, a woman of ill repute who defied lawful order. You've corrupted her, or she's corrupted you. It matters not. She returns with us, now. Some of the men shifted uneasily, their bluster faltering slightly under Silas's silent scrutiny. Others, emboldened by Thorne's rhetoric, gripped their makeshift weapons tighter. We know she's in there, one man shouted. Bring her out, or we'll drag her out. Ilara felt a cold dread, but also a surge of something hot and powerful. It was anger. It was defiance. It was the will to protect the only kindness she had known. She took a deep breath. The stone in her throat felt heavy, but she knew she had to move it. She stepped out of the cabin, past Silas, to stand slightly in front of him. Her limp was noticeable, a testament to their cruelty. Her mended dress, clean but plain, was a stark contrast to Thorne's pretentious attire. The wind whipped her hair around her face, but she stood tall, her chin up. All eyes fixed on her. Thorn's lips curled into a sneer. So, the creature emerges. Ready to face justice, are you, girl? For a moment, the old shame threatened to engulf her. His words, the town's condemnation, her own deeply ingrained fear. Then she looked at Silas, standing solid and unwavering just behind her. He hadn't spoken, but his presence was a shield. She found her voice. It was raspy at first, unused for so long. I am not a creature, Judge Thorn. The words, though quiet, carried across the tense yard. The men stirred. Thorn's eyes narrowed. I am Elara, she continued, her voice gaining strength, drawing power from the very air she breathed, from the land that had sheltered her. And I refused you. I refused your cruelty, your judgment, your town that feasts on misery. She looked directly at Thorn, her gaze unflinching. You speak of order? You, who ordered me thrown from a cliff because my body did not please you, because my will did not bend to yours? That is not order. That is tyranny. A murmur rippled through the assembled men. Some looked down, unable to meet her gaze. This man, she gestured toward Silas, showed me kindness when you showed me only hate. He sheltered me when you cast me out. He is silent, yes. But his silence holds more decency, more honor, than all your empty words. Judge Thorn's face was purple with rage. Lies. Slander. She's bewitched him. Seize her. But the men hesitated. Elara's words, raw and true, had struck a chord. They had all been there. They had all watched. Silas took a small step, placing himself more fully beside Elara, a silent, unshakable ally. He didn't speak, but his message was clear. They would have to go through him. And suddenly, the prospect of confronting this quiet, formidable man, and the woman whose courage was now blazing before them, seemed far less appealing. One by one, some of the men lowered their weapons. A few even began to back away. Judge Thorn, seeing his authority crumbling, his mob dissolving, let out a frustrated roar. You'll regret this. Both of you. He wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his remaining loyalists scrambling to follow, a retreating tide of bluster and shame. Elara stood, trembling slightly, the adrenaline slowly ebbing. Silas remained beside her. The wind died down, and a fragile ray of sunshine broke through the clouds, illuminating the small ranch. He looked at her, his eyes, for the first time, holding a clear, undeniable warmth. He still didn't speak. But he reached out, his large, calloused hand gently taking hers. His touch was a promise. A new peace, hard-won and defiant, settled over the land. They had faced the judgment, and they had stood firm. Together. The cabin, with its mended things and its shared silence, was no longer just a refuge. It was home. That evening, 2 bowls sat on the small table by the fire, not just one. And the silence was filled with the unspoken language of a family found, a future reclaimed. Thank you for watching. We hope this story of courage and quiet strength resonated with you. If you enjoyed Elara and Silas's journey, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more inspirational short films. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What did Elara's stand mean to you? What does true strength look like? Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to life. Until next time, find strength in kindness and courage in your convictions.